Welcome back to another edition of Dig Sports. I'm Andrew Alexander alongside Dig Sports editor Trey Mongrue. Trey, the Tigers took one on the chin this past week, losing to Mississippi State 34-29. What are your thoughts? You've had almost a week to see everything. What are your thoughts on the Tigers' performance against the Bulldogs?
Yeah, you said it best. They did take it on the chin. And, a big storyline coming into that game was, of course, the win streak LSU had against Mississippi State. However, the law of averages says that eventually Mississippi State was going to lose. However, I don't think anyone suspected the LSU to lose the way they did. They were dominated in all three phases of the game against Mississippi State and on their home field. So it was a pretty tough one to take for the Tigers.
Yeah, I think by the fourth quarter, anything but a miracle would have solved it for the Tigers, and they almost got that miracle in the form of Brandon Harris. And obviously, with Brandon Harris coming in and being so successful in a backup quarterback role, that starts to raise some questions about quarterback. But quarterback's not the only position on the field right now that LSU fans should be concerned about. Besides quarterback, where else are the Tigers really in desperate need to improve?
We've been talking about it a lot, but I think you do have to keep on going back to the defensive line, and a lot of that has to do with there's just no depth there right now. You look at in past seasons, defensive coordinator John Chavis has always been really good against the spread. Dak Prescott had all the time in the world, and that allowed him to just make decision after decision and correct decision after correct decision, and LSU just never had a chance against a guy like him.
And Trey, I think it's fair to point out that the Tigers in the 2011 recruiting class, they recruited 3 defensive tackles. One of those, Anthony Johnson's now in the NFL. The other 2 are Quentin Thomas and Mickey Johnson. You may be asking yourself, who's Mickey Johnson? And that's a fair point because he doesn't really ever play. Quentin Thomas is the guy who played sparingly last year, was projected starter this year before the quote-unquote bicep tear. And so, but he hasn't really made a huge impact this season. That means most of your impact defensive interior linemen are freshmen and sophomore. That's never a good thing.
And the worst part about that is you heard Miles on Monday say a guy like Lewis Neal is going to start getting more playing time there. The guy came in as a defensive end. He's 6'1", 255 pounds. That's not good when him and true freshman Devon Gottschall, who was coming off an ACL surgery, is beating out guys like Greg Gilmore, Frank Herron, and Macadius Bain, who've been here for 2 full years now and still haven't really cracked the lineup.
And Trey, to be fair, Macadius come in late in the game and compared with Lewis Neal, they had some great stops near the end of the game. And I think, honestly, that really helped the Tigers on the very last Bulldog drive because you had Christian Locatour, you had coming in, Devon Gottschall, rested guys were able to come in and shut down Dak Prescott, the Mississippi State offensive attack. So I think the big key is rotation. And maybe, even if a guy's not as good, maybe not as experienced, having guys rested is probably more important at this point than just having your best guy out there. Because Christian Locatour is not going to be able to play 80 snaps. Right. And this is not the last high-octane offense the LSU Tigers are going to see. Transitioning back to the quarterback play, Brandon Harris came in late in the game, had a very, very successful drive, multiple drives, multiple touchdowns. Where do you see it? Obviously, Miles has come out and announced that Jennings will be the starter. He's going to play in a like fashion, like he has before with the offense. Where do you see, or what's the best strategy LSU should employ this week against New Mexico State in order to get both guys prepared for the upcoming SEC gauntlet?
Well, if it was up to me, and I wrote about this in the latest issue of Dig, I would have given Brandon Harris a shot to start, not because the 4 minutes he had against Mississippi State won him the job or anything like that, but just to see what you have in this guy. You're going up against a team this weekend where if you just show up on the field, LSU's going to win. Give Brandon Harris that shot. See if he can build off of his performance against Mississippi State, because Anthony Jennings, and he was shaken up a little bit. Twice he had to leave the game because of shoulder injuries. And so I think this is your perfect opportunity to give Harris your shot. He definitely showed us something last week against Mississippi State with his deep ball, and he just showed poise in the pocket, and I think that's something LSU's really missing right now.
And I think it's also fair to point out that Zach Mettenberger was your starter last year. And so people want to ask, why didn't Les Miles bring in Anthony Jennings last year? Well, you had a future NFL draft pick, a future guy that's playing on the Tennessee Titans now that was out there playing, a senior, a fifth-year senior.
Right.
This year you don't have that if you're the LSU team. You've got 2 guys that are very inexperienced. I mean, Brandon Harris is green. Anthony Jennings is green as well. So I think there's no harm in throwing a guy like Brandon Harris out there, especially when you have all these big tests coming up. Road games at the Swamp, road games at Auburn, games against Ole Miss, Alabama, Texas A&M. Really, I mean, that's 5 games right there to the Tigers. Who knows? Maybe they lose, maybe they don't. I'm just saying there's a possibility. You don't think they may not be the favorite in many of those games. So I think you're right that they have to give this guy some meaningful snaps.
Well, and the thing is, for the past 4 games, they've kind of sort of gone with the dual quarterbacks, as most of the time it's been Jennings, and then Harris would get some spot series every now and then. However, that's going to have to end at some point. You have to decide on one of these guys, because it's not like a Jordan Jefferson, Jarrett Lee situation where depending on who's in, the defense has to change its entire scheme. Anthony Jennings and Brandon Harris are largely the same quarterback in that they could both tuck it and run. They could both throw it. Now, who does it better? That's still a debate that we'll probably see unfold again against New Mexico State. But eventually, with the the meat of your SEC schedule coming up, you've got to choose between one of these guys.
And I don't know, honestly, I don't know how the LSU coaching staff can truly evaluate Brandon Harris when he's never really seen in-game reps against a tough defense. Say what you want, Brandon Harris had a very vanilla defense to throw against, and he did a great job doing that, but it wasn't the same coverage that Anthony Jennings saw earlier in the game.
Yeah, and freshman ignorance is a real thing, and I mean that in the best way possible. We saw it with Anthony Jennings last year when he came in against Arkansas. Largely, these guys come in late in the game. They have nothing to lose at this point. It's already assumed, that the worst is going to happen. They come in, they're feeling loose, and they could just gunsling it around. So then once you become the starter, as we see with Jennings, you learn more of the playbook. It might get a little more nerve-wracking. So that could easily happen to Harris as well. We'll see.
LSU Tigers welcome in the New Mexico State Aggies this week in the Tiger Stadium. What are some of the big things that LSU can use this week, sort of almost a rent-a-win week? What are the things that they can do this week to help prepare themselves for games at Auburn, at Florida in the coming weeks ahead?
Well, I'm sure a lot of people in Baton Rouge would like to see LSU throw the ball around. That may not be the case this week. And New Mexico State's a team that in their last 2 games they've given up 800 total yards on the ground. And that bodes well for Leonard Fournette, who, he came into the season, hasn't really lived up to the hype, but that was because he had ridiculous hype. However, in the last 3 games, he's been the Tigers' leading rusher. I think this will be a very big game for him. And LSU as a whole, they probably won't have to pass it that much. They got a deep backfield. They could probably just hand it off, 40, 50 times a game, go and win it.
If LSU was to pass, we saw a lot of Malachi Dupree late in the game against Mississippi State. Has he potentially emerged as the #1 receiver to kind of usurp Trey Durrell?
I'm not sure if he's ready to usurp Durrell just yet. However, he did prove that he is capable going forward. And I talked with Durrell about this last week, and he mentioned how the game week leading up to Mississippi State was the first time Dupree was fully healthy, and he showed that. He's a physical freak in that he's taller than any defensive back that he's going up against. We saw that in both of his touchdowns against Mississippi State, where he just out-jumped the other guy or out-physicaled the other guy. And I think going forward, him and Durrell, plus of course Trey Quinn and John Diarse, it's going to make a pretty potent wide receiver corps. You just got to hope that there's somebody there that can give them the ball consistently.
Trey, from what you've seen, looking at last game, sort of giving it a grade, who would you say your biggest winners and losers from the LSU team are this past week?
Winners, it's a cliche answer, but I think you have to go Brandon Harris. Whether it was against a prevent defense with a bunch of second stringers or not, he did do enough to where Miles came out and said that he will get more playing time. How much will that be? We'll find out this weekend. But he's definitely showed something going forward to where, Les Miles feels like the quarterback battle needs to be reignited. Losers, I think you have to go with the LSU defense as a whole. They came in with the momentum of, having 31 straight possessions without allowing a score. That was obliterated by Dak Prescott, and they're going to be reeling. You might not really see that much against New Mexico State, but, with the 2-game road trip coming up and including a very dynamic offense in Auburn, they got to shore some things up, and they got to do it fast.
My winner of the week is all the LSU fans that stayed in the stadium to see the almost miraculous comeback. My losers of the week are all the fans that left the stadium, stay at the stadium to the buzzer sounds. I'm all about that. I love doing that. I don't understand why people leave an SEC game. Hey, support your Tigers. That's all I have to say. Whatever. If you're not going to stay the whole time, just stay at home. Just stay at home. So do better, LSU fans. Do better. So Trey, before we get out of here, what's your score prediction against the Mexico Aggies this week?
I think it's going to be kind of like what Georgia did to Troy last week, and it's going to be a very cathartic beatdown for LSU and coming off a loss. I say 45-3. They're going to be running the ball at will against this Aggie defense.
66-0 is my score.
Like the Georgia-Troy game.
Exactly. I'm going exactly Georgia-Troy, just straight chalk. For Dig Sports, I'm Andrew Alexander. He's Trey Mongrue. Hey, check all your LSU coverage at digbatonrouge.com.